Welcome to the Fantasy Source Baseball Podcast. My name is David A. Arnott, sitting here with Bill Bender, and today we are talking about outfielders going into the 2011 season. One of the big things that is different about different leagues is my college league, my buddies I play with, we play with 3 outfielders. A lot of other leagues, it's almost standard, play with 5 outfielders. Totally changes the way things go, but in a sense, ranking the outfielders one by one doesn't really change how you see them ranked. Bill, might you be able to speak a little bit to how that might affect your ranking in an overall sense, having only 3 outfielders versus 5 outfielders in your lineup?
Well, I think this year the talent pool at outfield is a little less deep than it has been in years past, and that will be a problem if you're in a 4 or 5 outfielder league. But I like the leagues that have 3 outfielders. And I actually like the leagues that have right, center, left because I think it's more of a challenge. But, when you look at this year's rankings, there's even that debate at the top where, as most people want to take Carlos Gonzalez or Carl Crawford with that top outfielder spot, we at the Fantasy Source, we've gone with the safe pick. We're taking Ryan Braun first.
Now, why do you have Braun ahead of those other 2 guys?
Well, I just think it's because he's the safe pick. If you look at his numbers, he ranks first among our outfielders in RBIs and runs over the past 3 years. He's second in home runs. He's hitting .303 with 16 stolen bases in that same time period too. He's just the safest guy. With Carlos Gonzalez, it's almost a case of we want to see him do it again. Carl Crawford, the move to Boston's good, but he's a guy I'd never draft in the first round. And then Josh Hamilton, the other guy you could argue for, always gets hurt. So with Ryan Braun, you're looking at the safest guy, and he continues to do it.
You mentioned Hamilton almost always getting hurt, Gonzalez and Crawford being not as much a sure thing you would think as Braun. I feel like we go down the list in outfielders, and you say, well, outfield isn't all that deep. Automatically, my knee-jerk reaction is, well, of course outfield's deep. It's where they put the sluggers. It's where they put all the most athletic guys that you've got. But when you actually look at the list, it becomes fairly uninspiring fairly quickly. I mean, we looked at the list of Fantasy Source guys who are ranked from about 7 on down, 6, 7, 8 on down. I would say those are guys you wouldn't necessarily think off the top of your head are, yes, I would pick that guy. I'm on the top 10 outfielders. But then all of a sudden, when you look at what they actually did, what their actual stats are, someone like Shin-Soo Choo and Nelson Cruz, the difference isn't all that great.
Right, and the trick is not to think of it. This isn't an outfield whereas, maybe in the 70s you were looking at an NL outfield of Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, and Roberto Clemente. Those days are definitely gone. But I think the trick with outfielders, especially with the top 25 we were talking before, there's a lot of guys that are under 25, and there's a lot of guys that are 30 or over, and then there's the in-between. If you sort out those 3 groups, maybe grab one outfielder from each group, like a guy like Shin-Soo Choo. He's in his prime right now, 27, 28, a 2020 guy. He's in one of those groups. And then you can maybe take a shot on one of those young guys like Carlos Gonzalez, Jason Hayward, Jay Bruce, Mike Stanton, the guys that everybody loves right now. But you can't take 3 of those young guys or you will get burned.
So let's talk about those young guys and those old guys, because in fantasy we always seem to want to be hitting guys in their primes. But there's value to be had in those older guys and those younger guys, especially if the other people in your league aren't necessarily as aware of just how good those guys are. So who are some of your favorite guys from the young group, why they're your favorite, and then we'll talk about that older group.
Well, I know a lot of people like Jason Hayward, but you're really going to have to pay for him. I think if you wait a little bit longer, you might be able to grab Justin Upton, who I think he has a bounce-back year in him this year. He's only 23, and if the worst what he was last year, you're in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
And I'm also going to be probably called a Reds homer a little bit, but I like Drew Stubbs and Jay Bruce. Drew Stubbs is a little bit older. Jay Bruce only 23, and he has 3 straight 20-homer seasons. Now, when he breaks out, you're looking at a Joey Votto type year.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those odd things about the Reds is that everyone kind of knows that they have a really good offense, a young offense outside of Scott Rowland, but the actual components aren't particularly well known. And I mean, that strikes me about Jay Bruce is that he's a clear-cut breakout candidate as far as I see. What about the old guys that you see?
Well, a couple of the guys in the office don't like Ichiro Suzuki as much anymore because he's 37, but the guy still gets it done. He's going to get you 200 hits. He's going to get you 300, but I don't know if I draft him maybe as high as years past. A guy like Jason Worth also could become, because he moved to Washington, people are going to be looking down on him a little bit, but I think in the spot where you might be able to get him he'll be a value pick. So don't just totally push Jason Worth out the door. He's still getting the hit behind Ryan Zimmerman. I think it's not a bad value pick.
I mean, that could be this year's version of the Reds, a sneaky good offense that people just don't realize how good they are until it's August, you know?
Right.
Moving farther into the draft, farther down, after a lot of the other managers in the league have probably claimed their starters and have looked at all the name brand players that are gone. Who do you see as like the biggest sleeper value pick that a lot of guys are going to be able to see this year? Maybe you might see him as a riser, someone who's actually going to have way more value this year than he did last year.
Well, right now I like Andrew McCutchen a lot. He's not exactly later round type guy, but he's a guy that I just look at him and I see the National League version of Carl Crawford, and he does the same thing in a 5x5 setting. Not as many steals, but if you look at their statistics up against each other, they're pretty close.
And I think he's actually demonstrated, both scouting-wise and in the minors and in the majors, more power, too.
Right, absolutely. And another guy I like, and it's not really a secret or sleeper or anything like that, but I just like Manny Ramirez in Tampa Bay. He's old. He's got something to prove. If he's motivated, he gets to face the Red Sox and Yankees a lot, and I think Manny Ramirez may have one more year in him.
Manny Ramirez is a prime example of what one of the other guys in the Sporting News Expert Baseball League likes to say, Eric Ferreira. He likes to say that boring is not necessarily bad. Everyone knows who Manny Ramirez is. Everyone knows that he's probably gonna do. That still has value. You don't need to look smart in order. You're not going to be considered smart for drafting Manny, but maybe you are if everyone else forgets about him.
Right, and he's got a great line at Tropicana Field. He's hit, I think, 25 home runs in 77 career games. Was a stat I put on the Fantasy Source blog a couple weeks ago. So he's a guy that, like you said, boring can be good. And especially at this position, proven track record is good.
And now, for the downside, are you going to go out on a limb and tell us about anybody that you'd like to avoid, that you feel a lot of managers would be very tempted to draft him, but you're saying, no, stay away?
Well, I don't know necessarily that I would stay completely away, but Vernon Wells is kind of tricky for me because he's moving to a better team, but he's not moving to a better park, and he's not moving into a place where he's going to swing away in all those American League West ballparks. So Vernon Wells, who hit 31 homers last season, could just as easily regress into that 15 to 20 home run guy. And owners that are banking on him just because he's on a better team, if the Angels are a better team than the Blue Jays even, they might end up disappointed.
All right, Bill, thanks for talking about the outfielders.
I appreciate it, David. Thank you.